specialist in ancient building techniques. The key lies in pieces of wood fitted into notches cut into the stone.
First of all, you had to get a piece of hardwood and cut out the shape so that it fitted into the other side. So the block that's coming up to it, you put it in, bang, bang, bang. It pulled the two blocks together tight so that they couldn't move.
So these are more to assemble it rather than to hold it together once it's built?
It is. It's to line them up properly and make sure that they can't move at all while the whole job's being built. Of course, when it's all solid and finished, there's no way that it's going to move after that.
And then the stones had to be sanded smooth.
We know they didn't put the columns up smooth from the beginning because we have one here that's still carved in the rough. Now, I think they didn't have time to be fussing with these in the quarry. They left it to the builders at the site to finish dressing them. They were trying to produce as many blocks in the quickest amount of time possible.
When the columns had been erected and the ramps and the platforms were gradually being lowered, the workers would be smoothing the stone like this, with a sandstone rubber like this, in preparation for the cutting of the hieroglyphs.
Ramses and his father oversaw this work, but the time was coming when Seti would die and Ramses become king. He would be able to do as he wished. And the hall at Karnak would be just the start of the most ambitious series of engineering projects that his country had ever seen. When Ramses became pharaoh, he became the most powerful man in the world. His entire life had been a preparation for this, and he grasped the challenge. He took personal control of the building at Karnak. Artists working under his orders depict him joining in the work. It's hard to believe that he would have gotten his hands dirty, but a formal foundation ceremony demonstrated that what his father had started was now to be his monument, his achievement.
First, the king stretches out a cord between two poles in order to ceremonially survey the temple. Next, he takes a mattock and he hacks up the earth. Then he has to make the first mud brick. And then finally, he does the ceremony of giving the temple to its Lord.
He seems to claim in many texts to have taken a considerable interest in it, to have been involved in the planning, to have researched historical records to ensure the accuracy of temple plans and designs.
Kent Weeks has researched these records himself and built up a picture of how hundreds of masons scaled these columns, working up to 70 feet in the air. It's clear work didn't finish once the columns were up. Every surface was to be covered with elaborate hieroglyphs.
There's good evidence that the ancient Egyptians knew and used scaffolding in their engineering work, as in this tomb painting from the 18th dynasty. Here, the workmen have lashed pieces of wood together to create scaffolding so that they can polish and prepare larger-than-life-size statues of the king.
Every inch had to be carved or shaped by hand.
One man is using an abrasive to polish the surface of the stone, and this man is working with a chisel to carefully detail the eye.
The size of Ramses' ambition becomes even more astonishing when you realize what his men had to work with. This was a time before iron. The masons had to carve their stone with tools made from soft copper. Dennis Stocks believes that the only way we can understand what these ancient builders did is by attempting to recreate their work with the tools they used.
Having done that and delineated the edge of the sign, all we need to do is take out the middle with a chisel.
Dennis discovers that although the ancient Egyptian culture was highly sophisticated, they could achieve some of their most complex work using Stone Age technology like this flint tool.
And because it is so hard and sharp, it will delineate the features of the sign much better than the copper chisel work.
Each column, each wall would be adorned in this way. And the hieroglyphs are more than decoration. They are packed with political and religious messages.
To the average tourist, the hypostyle hall seems a jumbling confusion of scenes and inscriptions, but when you look carefully at them, you see there is an order. The gods in the scenes always faced as if they're inside the temple looking out. The king always approaches as if he's coming from the outside into the temple to greet the gods.
The walls of this temple describe the relationship between the gods, Ramses, and the people of Egypt. It's a demonstration that Ramses' authority is born from divine power.
You stand there surrounded by this forest of columns, and it's meant to evoke the feeling that you're in a sacred space, an enclosed space that's contained by the gods, where a new life comes into being.
By bringing together decades of research with state-of-the-art computer graphics, we can reveal what this space would have looked like when it was first built. All this weathered stone was once covered with vivid painting.
Most temples in Egypt appear to us today to be pretty monotonic, but actually in antiquity they were a riot of colors.
The kind of raw pigment that Ramses' designers used can still be bought today in the markets of Luxor. Now, as then, it's mixed with vegetable oil and bound with natural glue.
The ancient Egyptians had a much more limited range than what we see here. They were basically working with 6 colors: red, yellow, green, blue, white, and black, and that was it.
The most expensive pigments were blues and greens.
Can you imagine a tomb painted in this color blue?
And would actually really communicate to the people looking at this material that you were able to afford the very finest.
I think we're lucky that most of the paint and pigment on these temple walls has faded, because 3,000 years ago, these must have been the most garish places you can imagine.
Thousands of man-hours and vast expense went into building and adorning this hall. And yet only a privileged elite of courtiers and priests would ever get to see it.
Ordinary hoi polloi like you and me might be allowed outside the temple, and maybe on festive occasions we might be allowed into the first courtyard, but that would be it.
The temple was not a public place of worship. It was the private home of a god, the place where on behalf of his people the pharaoh makes his offerings to that god. It raises him above all other mortals. It gives him power. The secret interior of the hypostyle hall would be hidden behind monumental curtain walls. And the walls themselves would be a statement of Ramses' greatness. This phase of the building would require 7,000 tons of stone, and only a certain type of stone would do.
Here we are at Thebes with these huge limestone hills surrounding us, and yet limestone was not the stone of choice for the building of temples. For that, the Egyptians much preferred sandstone, and the closest source to that is about 100 kilometers further south.
The vast majority of it came from one area, the Silsila quarries. They are 3 days' journey up the Nile from Karnak. Kent Weeks has made this journey. The pharaohs had an enormous hunger for stone.
When you consider the number of cubic feet of sandstone that have gone into the New Kingdom buildings constructed at Thebes, Silsila must have been a site that was going full bore practically every day of the year for 500 years.
Silsila was on the river, but investigators have found other quarries deep in the Egyptian desert. A team of